I was 13 the night my mother told me that my father no longer existed, and that the man standing in our kitchen, a stranger with slicked back hair and a cold smile, was now supposed to be my dad. She said it like a command, not a choice. Call him Dad Rachel, or you will regret it. His name was Victor, and even before he opened his mouth, I felt something in my stomach twist, like my body already knew he was poison. My real father, Michael, was sitting in a prison cell at that very moment for a crime. He swore he did not commit a crime I never believed he could have done. I still had his letters hidden under my mattress pages that smelled faintly of ink and tears. I read them every night, whispering the words to myself like prayers. But my mother did not care about prayers or truth. She wanted me to forget him and replace him with this man whose eyes lingered on me too long and whose presence made my skin crawl. That night, when I refused to call him Dad, my mother grabbed my arm so hard I could feel the bruise rising, and she whispered that if I ever said Michael's name again, she would burn every single letter he had ever sent me. My chest clenched in terror because I knew she was not bluffing. I nodded and swallowed the word Dad, choking on it, as Victor grinned like he had just won something. But what he and my mother never knew was that I never stopped talking to my father. Even as they tried to erase him from my life, I was still sending him letters through a friend's mailbox, still keeping him alive in my world, still holding on to the only man who had ever truly protected me. My father, Michael, was not perfect, but he was the kind of man who worked himself to the bone for his family, fixing broken machines at the plant for long hours, just to make sure I had school supplies and my mother could keep her hair appointments. He was the sort of man who fell asleep at the dinner table still in his work boots, grease under his fingernails, but always woke up when I whispered goodnight. When the police arrested him for manslaughter after a fight in a bar, he swore he had not even started. My world cracked in half. I was there that night. I saw him go into the restroom, and when he came out, he was splattered with blood eyes, wide in shock, yelling for someone to call 911. The police took him before I could understand what had happened, and my mother never once visited him in jail. Instead, she decided he was guilty before the trial even began. Within months, Victor moved into our house. He brought flashy gifts, expensive cologne that stung my nose, and a fake smile that convinced the neighbors he was a generous man. To me, he was a shadow in the hallways, watching me too closely. My mother Linda said I had to accept him because Michael had ruined everything. She called my dad a murderer and said I should be grateful Victor wanted to be part of my life. I was 13, stuck between loyalty and fear, but I already knew something was wrong. My mother acted as if she had been waiting for this man, as if my father's downfall was her permission slip to start over. She told me that calling Victor Dad was my only chance at having a normal life again. But every time she forced me to say the word, it felt like ashes in my mouth. Victor's mask did not take long to slip. At first, it was the way his eyes lingered on me when we ate dinner, slow and deliberate, like I was some kind of puzzle he meant to solve. He would lick his lips while chewing his stare heavy across the table, and when I shifted uncomfortably, he would chuckle under his breath as if he owned the room. My mother called it sweet, said he was proud of how fast I was growing, but I could see the glint in his eyes and knew there was nothing fatherly in it. When I was 14 one evening after school, I came home late from choir practice. The house was dark except for the dim light in the living room. Victor was sitting on the couch with a beer in one hand, his other hand tapping against the armrest. As soon as I walked past him toward the stairs, he grabbed my wrist and yanked me back so hard I nearly lost balance. His breath smelled of whiskey as he leaned close and said, I was supposed to tell him when I would be late because real families respected each other. Then he twisted my arm until I cried out, leaving angry red marks that would turn purple by morning. When I showed my mother, she told me to stop being dramatic and accused me of trying to sabotage her relationship. I learned that night my mother would never be on my side again. From then on, Victor's control seeped into every corner of my life. He took my bedroom door off the hinges, claiming it was so I would not slam it. But I knew the real reason was so he could watch me sleep from the hallway. He installed a small blinking camera in the hall, pointing toward my room, saying it was for safety. He went through my backpack at night and sometimes left things arranged differently, just so I would know he had been there. He demanded I sit beside him on the couch and rest my head against his shoulder while we watched television. And when I tried to resist, my mother would scold me for being ungrateful. He began insisting I call him Dad in front of neighbors, and if I hesitated, his hand would grip the back of my neck tight enough to make me see stars. By the time I turned 15, I had bruises I learned to cover with sweaters, even in warm weather, and a constant feeling of dread that never left me. The only relief I had was the secret letters I sent to my father through Allison, my best friend. We made a system where I slipped folded papers between the pages of my textbooks, and then after school went to her house to use her mailbox. Dad's replies came through the prison email system on a hidden account I had created at the library. I memorized his words and deleted the messages quickly so my mother would not find them. Those letters were the only proof that someone in this world still loved me and believed me. But Victor grew bolder with time. One night when my mother was at work for a late shift, he knocked on my bedroom wall, then opened the door without waiting. He sat at the edge of my bed and said we were finally becoming a real family, now that my last name had been changed to his. He stroked my hair and said I should be thankful he cared so much. My skin crawled, my stomach churned, and I bolted into the bathroom, locking the door and sitting on the tile floor until dawn. The next morning, my mother screamed at me for disrespecting him. It became clear to me that she had chosen him over me. Another time when I refused to ride with him to school, he slapped me so hard my lip split open. He told me that naughty girls who disobeyed fathers always ended up in institutions. My mother watched this without lifting a finger. Her arms crossed her eyes cold. I started to believe I was trapped forever. But the turning point came the day I found his stash in the garage. I had been looking for an old bike tire when I stumbled across a locked toolbox hidden behind boxes. When I managed to pry it open with a screwdriver, I found rolls of cash bound with rubber bands and a pistol wrapped in a towel. My hand shook as I shoved everything back the way I found it, but I knew then Victor was not just cruel. He was dangerous in ways I had not imagined. That same week, my mother told me she had filed paperwork to legally change my last name to Victor's without telling me. She said it was for my own good, so that I would belong to a proper family. That night, Victor came into my room smelling of beer and told me we should celebrate being one happy family now. He slid his hand onto my thigh, and I shoved him off with all my strength before running into the bathroom again. The lock on the door was my only shield. I wrote a desperate letter to my father about it, and days later he sent back a real paper letter instead of an email. The ink had bled through in places, and I knew he must have been crying while writing. Reading his words almost broke me. He told me he was sorry he could not protect me, that he believed me, and that he knew I was stronger than I realized. I held that letter to my chest and swore I would survive no matter what Victor tried. But surviving grew harder. My mother once caught the hidden letters under my mattress. She dragged me into the backyard, lit them on fire one by one, and forced me to watch the ashes scatter. Then she took the door off my room permanently, leaving me exposed to Victor's midnight visits. He would stand in the doorway at night, silhouetted by the hall light, just watching me breathe. I began sneaking into the school library late after hours to email my dad, rambling about everything until my fingers cramped. I did not even know what I wanted anymore, only that I had to get the words out before I drowned in them. 2 weeks later, he replied with a message that changed everything. In it, hidden in a long paragraph of comforting words, was a single line: "Did you check where I said?" At first I was confused. Then I went back through his older messages until I found the one I had skimmed months earlier, when my heart was too broken to read carefully. It told me to look in the attic behind the radiator. The following week, when my mother and Victor went out on a date night, I climbed up into the attic with a flashlight. My hands trembled as I searched until I found a small journal wrapped in plastic exactly where Dad had said. On the marked page written weeks before his arrest were his suspicions about my mother and Victor. He had seen them sneaking around together and did not know how to confront her. My blood ran cold. I clutched the journal to my chest, but the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made my stomach drop. They were back early. My heart raced as I scrambled toward the attic opening. Just as I reached the ladder, Victor's head appeared. His eyes locked onto mine in the beam of my flashlight, and the look he gave me made my skin crawl. He climbed up broad shoulders, filling the space, and asked what I was doing. I lied and said I was looking for old stuffed animals. But his jaw tightened. He grabbed my arm hard, dragged me down the ladder, and presented me to my mother like I was a thief. She rolled her eyes and told me to stop sneaking around. That night, I hid the journal inside my pillowcase, its corners pressing into my cheek as I tried to sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump, and every time Victor's shadow appeared in the doorway, I clutched the pillow tighter, terrified he would discover it. By morning, I knew I could not keep the secret alone any longer. I would need help from someone outside these walls, someone who still believed in my father's innocence. I thought about who I could trust, and only one name surfaced in my mind: my Uncle David, my father's older brother, a retired police officer who had been banned from our house the moment my father was convicted. My mother called him dangerous, said he enabled Michael's violent tendencies, but I remembered his kindness, the smell of sawdust on his clothes, and the butterscotch candies he always carried for me. I dug through an old kitchen drawer filled with expired coupons and broken pens until I found a forgotten address book, and there it was, his number written in my father's handwriting. The next day during lunch at school, I slipped out to the payphone by the parking lot, coins trembling in my hand as I dialed. He answered on the third ring, his voice gruff but softening instantly when I said my name. Words tumbled out of me in a rush about Victor, about Mom, about Dad's letters, about the journal I had found. Uncle David told me to slow down, to breathe. And then he said the most important words I had heard in years. "You did the right thing calling me." We arranged to meet at the public library the next afternoon. I told my mother I had a group project, and even had a teacher back me up when Victor checked. I nearly ran across town, my backpack bouncing, until I saw David's old truck parked near the entrance. He looked older gray and his beard deep lines in his face, but his eyes were still sharp. Sitting inside that truck, I showed him photos of the journal entries I had taken on my phone in secret, and I watched his knuckles whiten on the steering wheel as he scrolled. He said it confirmed everything he had always suspected, that my father had been set up. But suspicion was not enough. We needed proof, solid evidence that could hold up in court. Over the next weeks, we met at the library 3 more times, always careful, always watching over our shoulders. David started tracking down people who had been at the bar the night of the crime. Edward, the security guard, remembered seeing Victor go into the bathroom just before Michael. Caroline, the bartender, recalled Victor hanging around for weeks asking about Dad's schedule, and she remembered him ordering a whiskey neat that very night. Then came the breakthrough. Brian, the bar manager, had forgotten about an old backup system that recorded the hallway to the bathrooms. He still had the files on a dusty hard drive. We watched the footage together in his living room that smelled of cigarettes and coffee, and my heart nearly stopped when the timestamp showed Victor entering the restroom at 9:47, Michael at 9:52, and then Michael stumbling out covered in blood at 9:53, while Victor had left at 9:51, smoothing his shirt. It was clear. He had planted the evidence, framed my father, and left him to take the blame. Uncle David copied the footage onto multiple USB drives and told me to act normal at home no matter how hard it would be. But I must not have been as good at hiding as I thought, because Victor grew suspicious. He watched me constantly, drove me to school, checked my phone at night, and one evening he sat on my bed leaning so close I could smell the sour wine on his breath. He whispered that if I did not stop sneaking around, something might happen to my mother, because accidents happen every day. Cars lose their brakes, gas leaks in houses, and people fall downstairs. His casual tone made the threat even colder. I held it together until the next library meeting, when I broke down crying in Uncle David's truck. He told me we had to move faster, and that Dad's lawyer was already interested, but we needed the original journal as well as the copies. That night at 3 in the morning, I crept to the bathroom where I had hidden the journal inside the toilet tank wrapped in plastic. My heart hammered as I pulled it out, still dry and safe, and slipped it into my backpack. But when I stepped back into the hall, Victor was standing there, like a shadow come to life. He asked why I was up, his eyes glinting in the dark. I said I felt sick, clutching my stomach, and somehow he let me pass. But the next morning, my backpack was empty on the kitchen table. The journal spread out like evidence. My mother stood beside Victor, pale and confused, as he spun lies about how I had forged the handwriting, how I had written fantasies to break them up. He told her I was disturbed, that I needed help, that I should be sent to a special boarding school run by his cousin in another state. My mother actually nodded. She looked at me with disappointment, not anger, as if she believed every poisonous word. That afternoon, Victor made me watch as he deleted the photos of the journal from my cloud account, stabbing the screen with his finger in triumph. He thought he had destroyed everything. What he did not know was that I had already passed copies to Uncle David. Days later, my mother announced that I would be leaving Monday for that school in the mountains. No phones, no visitors for 6 months. I realized then this was his way of silencing me permanently. Saturday morning, while Mom was grocery shopping and Victor was in the shower, I grabbed a small bag and ran to Allison's house. She let me use her phone to call David. We planned to meet at the library again. But when I returned to grab more clothes, Victor was waiting on the front steps, his hair damp eyes full of rage. He dragged me inside by my hair, threw me against the wall, and hissed that I had ruined everything. He confessed then, words spilling in a mix of fury and arrogance, that he had planted the bloody knife, that the drunk man in the restroom had stumbled onto him, and he had to silence him, that Michael had walked into the perfect frame job. What he did not know was that Allison's phone was in my pocket recording every word. That was when my mother came home early, groceries slipping from her hands as she heard him rant. The look on her face was shock, then horror as she realized the truth. She grabbed a kitchen knife and told him to leave, but his laughter filled the room. For once, however, she did not back down. And for the first time, I saw fear flicker across his eyes. The silence after my mother's command seemed to stretch forever, broken only by the thud of oranges rolling across the floor from her dropped grocery bags. Victor's face twisted from rage into something darker, a mask cracking under the weight of his own arrogance. He looked at me, then at my mother, and back again, his chest heaving. He said she was weak, that she would never dare turn him in, that he knew too much about her secrets, the debts she had hidden from my father, the affairs she thought nobody knew about. For a moment, I thought she might falter, but then she straightened knife still steady in her hand and told him to get out. He stormed past us, slamming the door so hard the frames rattled on the walls, but before leaving he turned and said it was not over, that we would all pay for betraying him. My mother collapsed on the floor, sobbing, her hands shaking. I knelt beside her and pulled the phone from my pocket, pressing play so she could hear his confession again. Every word cut into her like glass. She realized in that moment she had slept beside the man who destroyed our family, who had framed her husband, who had stolen years of my father's life and nearly destroyed mine. She whispered apologies over and over, saying she had been blind, that she had failed me, that she had failed Dad. I called Uncle David immediately. He arrived within minutes with the footage from the bar on a USB drive. We gathered at the kitchen table. The journal opened the recording on Allison's phone, replaying the footage paused on the frame showing Victor walking into the restroom. My mother's face turned gray. She vomited in the sink when she realized the depth of the betrayal, but then she agreed it was time to go to the police. 2 detectives came that night. They handled the journal carefully with gloves, listened to the recording 3 times, and watched the footage on my laptop. One detective said he had always had doubts about my father's conviction, that the forensics had never fully matched, but the pressure to close the case had been heavy. Now, with Victor's words, the footage, and the journal, everything made sense. They issued an arrest warrant immediately. A patrol car stayed outside our house that night, the flashing lights cutting through my curtains as my mother and I sat awake on the couch, the front door barricaded with furniture, every creak of the house making us jump. By morning, Uncle David called with news. His contacts in construction had spotted Victor at a motel 2 towns over, trying to pay cash for a room. Police swarmed the place by noon. He tried to run, but they caught him easily, dragging him out in handcuffs as he cursed and spit. In the trunk of his car, hidden in a lockbox, they found the original knife, the real murder weapon, with traces of blood still in the handle grooves, proof he had kept it like some sick trophy. At the station, Victor denied everything, claimed the recording was fake, claimed I had doctored the journal, claimed my mother had lied out of guilt. But the forensics on the knife matched the victim. The fingerprints matched his. and the wounds matched his height, not my father's. Confronted with the mountain of evidence, Victor finally broke. He confessed, fully bargaining for a plea deal, but the prosecutor was determined to push for the maximum sentence. Meanwhile, Dad's lawyer filed for an emergency appeal. Within weeks, the judge reviewed the evidence and ordered my father's immediate release. After more than a decade behind bars, my father walked out of prison gates to find me waiting. He looked older, thinner gray, in the hair I remembered as brown, but when he saw me, his eyes lit up. I ran into his arms, holding him so tightly I thought I might never let go. He cried into my hair, whispering that he had missed me every single day, that he had never stopped believing the truth would come out. My mother stood a few feet back, wringing her hands, tears streaking her cheeks. Dad looked at her for a long moment, then said they would talk later, but right now, he just wanted to go home. The drive back was quiet, broken only by the sound of my mother's soft sobs and my father's questions about school, about my life, about everything he had missed. He walked slowly through the house when we arrived, touching furniture, picture frames, the walls themselves, as if grounding himself in freedom. He refused to sleep in the old bedroom, choosing the couch instead, and I heard him pacing at 3 a.m, making coffee with trembling hands. When I told him about Victor's threats and abuse, he clenched his jaw, his hands shaking, but he pulled me close and said it was not my fault. Lawyers and reporters filled the following days, paperwork piled high, but my father focused only on clearing his name. My mother tried to speak to him, hovering, apologizing, but he kept his answers short. Within 2 weeks, she moved out, renting a small apartment across town, saying she needed space to face her own shame. Dad signed divorce papers without even reading them. She left him the house, the car, full custody of me. Her guilt was punishment enough. Victor remained in custody, denied bail, awaiting trial for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and assault. The prosecutor promised life without parole, and with the evidence, there was little chance of escape. For the first time in years, I felt safe. My nightmares eased, my father began rebuilding his life with Uncle David's help, and I could finally breathe without fear of Victor's shadow in my doorway. The months after Victor's arrest passed in a blur, but they were the first months in years when I could sleep through the night without fear of footsteps outside my door. The trial date was set for 6 months later, and in the meantime, my father began to build a new routine. He worked construction with Uncle David, came home covered in dust, exhausted, but content in a way I had never seen before. He told me manual labor cleared his head, that it reminded him of what was real, because when you put up a wall, you could see whether it stood straight or not. No lies involved. He started therapy too, sessions designed for men who had survived wrongful imprisonment. And though he rarely spoke about what happened inside those rooms, I could see the changes. He stopped flinching when doors slammed, stopped pacing the halls at night, stopped checking the locks 3 and 4 times. For the first time since my childhood, our house felt like a home again. My mother lived alone across town, her reputation in ruins. Neighbors whispered behind her back, old friends avoided her, and she looked 10 years older the last time I saw her. She sent letters, long, rambling apologies, but most went unopened. I kept 1 or 2 not for forgiveness, but as reminders of how blind loyalty can destroy a family. She had chosen Victor over truth, over me, over Dad, and now she bore the weight of that choice. Victor, meanwhile, faced the courtroom shackled in an orange jumpsuit. The evidence was overwhelming: the journal, the recording, the footage, the murder weapon. Witnesses testified one after another, painting a pattern of manipulation that stretched across states. He had targeted vulnerable women, framed innocent men, and left chaos behind him. When I took the stand, my hands shook, but I spoke every word clearly, telling the court about the nights he stood in my doorway, the bruises, the threats, the way he bragged about planting evidence. His lawyer tried to twist my words, but the recording silenced every argument. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before declaring him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, consecutive sentences, ensuring he would die behind bars. I looked straight at him as they led him away, wanting him to see that he had not broken me, that I had survived him. My father held my hand that day so tight my fingers ached, but I did not let go either. Justice was real, and for once it belonged to us. Months later, Dad received a settlement from the state for wrongful imprisonment. It was not enough to give him back the lost years, but it paid off the house, funded my education, and allowed him to take a long vacation to the mountains where he said the air smelled like freedom. We celebrated my 17th birthday with a cookout in the backyard. Uncle David and his family, bringing laughter neighbors dropping by to congratulate Dad on his release, and even Caroline the bartender who had testified showing up with a cake. For the first time in a decade, we were surrounded not by lies, but by people who cared. My father hugged me in front of everyone and said I had saved his life, that without my courage, he would still be locked away forgotten. Tears spilled down my face, but they were good tears, the kind that heal. In the years that followed, life did not become perfect, but it became ours again. I made the honor roll, got accepted into college, and decided to study criminal justice. I wanted to fight for families torn apart by lies the way mine had been. My father supported me every step, cheering at school concerts, cooking breakfast on Sundays, asking about every detail of my life. Uncle David became a constant presence, a reminder that family is defined by actions, not blood. As for my mother, she faded from our story. She tried once to come to the house begging for counseling, but my father stood firm at the door and told her no. She had made her choice long ago, and we were done paying for it. I watched her cry through the screen door and felt nothing. Some bridges are meant to burn. Years later, when I sat on the porch with my father watching fireflies flicker in the twilight, he told me he was proud of me, that I had grown into a strong woman who refused to be silenced. I told him I loved him and that he was the best father anyone could have asked for. We sat there in comfortable silence, no need for more words. We had survived the worst, we had fought back, and we had won. And that was enough. In the years after the trial, healing did not arrive all at once. It came in small and stubborn steps. At first, I jumped every time the phone rang, expecting bad news, or flinched when footsteps echoed in a hallway. But slowly, those reflexes eased. Therapy helped me put words to the pain, naming gaslighting and abuse for what they were teaching me, that survival was not shameful, but proof of strength. My father came to every session he was allowed, sitting quietly, letting me speak his hand steady on my shoulder when I faltered. Together, we built new rituals. Saturday morning breakfasts at the diner, where the waitress always remembered our order, Sunday hikes, where the air felt clean and sharp evenings, where we cooked dinner side by side in the kitchen that once reeked of fear. We laughed more than I thought possible, laughter that filled the house and drowned out the echoes of Victor's threats. College brought distance, but not disconnection. I called Dad every night my first semester, telling him about professors and essays about friends and the boy I was dating. He cried the day he walked me across campus, proud and terrified. But when he hugged me goodbye, he whispered that he finally believed in tomorrow. Healing meant more than surviving. It meant rebuilding a life worth living, a life where fear no longer dictated our choices. We chose love, we chose truth, we chose each other, and that choice carried us forward.